Hello. This is the next section of thoughts on this book, Talking to Terrorists. It's been interesting reading this. And I find that I tend to not only emphasize, but like as I'm reading these stories of trauma and despair, I feel again like I'm 14 sometimes. And so my reaction to it is rather emotional, I think. And then with my knowledge of the conflict, like and the history where I've just been hearing about it and hearing about it and hearing about it over and over again my entire life, and it never seems to be fixed, or even that anyone on the planet attempts to fix it realistically. It brings out my own political views in statements. So it's always interesting because when you're reading novels which are about history and stories, you can sort of detach yourself. But when you read things like this, which are about interviews and they contain the earnest and honest words of individual people, then you feel yourself drawn in to such a situation. You begin to emphasize and repeat, right? We feel the same way someone else feels when they are in trouble, when they are in pain, when they are angry, right? Then we feel scared when they're scared. When they're angry, we feel angry. We respond in this way. We mirror and match, even when it's just words on a page, because we look at ourselves and we see our inner rage. So I'm finding it, somewhat difficult to view this in a more abstract manner. Not that I'm really great at viewing things in an abstract manner, as evidenced by several other books I've read and how incensed I can be about ideas there. But it's something to think about. How much of my reaction and my thought processes and my thoughts are about this situation and these people, and how much of that is about me and the way I feel. But let's continue with the book in more specifics. This is chapter 37, so I've jumped ahead quite a bit in the book. And she's entering Gaza. This would be in the early 2000s, but Hamas is in control, and the Israelis are going to leave in a couple months, and so on. So it's different. She is going into Gaza right now and arriving at a checkpoint. Where she experiences her first real feeling of what it is like to be suspected. Okay. As my turn comes, I'm dressed like many of the professional Palestinian women, wearing a high-cut knit top covered by a long-sleeve button-up jacket that falls well over my hips, worn over long pants with flat shoes. I'm carrying a soft fabric bag in one hand that has my change of clothes and research notes in it, and a large purse over my other shoulder. As my turn comes, I approach the female Israeli soldier sitting on a stool with her automatic rifle draped over her shoulder. "Halt," she shouts out sharply in Hebrew as I walk towards her. I don't speak any Hebrew, so I think she's irritated that I'm walking slowly. I speed up. "Halt," she shouts again in Hebrew, this time jumping to her feet, automatic rifle in hand. I am confused. I'm looking at her right in the face and can't decipher what's wrong. I still think I'm moving too slow for her, moving even quicker. Suddenly, he jerks her gun to a ready position and points it right at me. I gasp and freeze in my tracks. "Halt," she screams. I see now that her eyes are fixated in the soft fabric bag I'm carrying, and that she thinks I am a Palestinian about to explode myself. "It's only clothes," I say as I comprehend her terror. "I'm American." Understanding that I'm speaking English and hearing me call myself an American, she calms and lowers her gun, and as she does, my terror turns to outrage. You should learn how to say stop in more than one language, I shout. You think Arabs can understand Hebrew, that anyone but Israelis knows what you're saying? This is a checkpoint for Palestinians. How could I possibly know you want me to stop? I see that she understands. She looks upset too. Sorry, she mumbles. I'm so furious I want to keep screaming at her, but her gun holds all the power. I have none. I almost got shot, I say. So she thought your pajama bag was a bomb. You can't blame her for wanting to take you out before you exploded and killed her. Hell, these soldiers are just kids, they want to live. Right? I mean, this is probably a daily occurrence. Somewhere in the Palestinian territory, somewhere at a checkpoint, this probably happens every single day. Right? Someone's walking too fast, or someone looks suspicious, or someone looks angry, or there's a new kid standing there's a soldier, and guns get pulled up into ready positions. People are confused, people get mad, and the difference you can already see here is in the power structure, right? If you're the soldier, you say sorry. If you're the person who's almost shot, you get mad, but you can only get so mad, right? You can only express yourself so much. You have to hold yourself in, you have to stop yourself. And so both sides feel a shame in this moment. A shame that, oh, I almost killed someone that I didn't have to. A shame that I was almost killed, and yet I can't express my outrage. I have to bottle it up, right? So both sides suffer from this. This is the idea that like Gandhi had with the nonviolence, that in these violent situations, both sides suffer, both sides take damage, right? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, sort of spiritual physics, right? You can't hit something without hurting your hand doing so. Which to me really seems to encapsulate much of the Palestinian-Israeli struggle. Right, so she's entering Gaza, which is a different environment. She's been in the West Bank so far. Now she's in Gaza. Now, Hamas has its stronghold in the West Bank, but in Gaza, Hamas rules. The Israelis make frequent incursions to take out militant hotbeds and disrupt their terrorist plots. The Israelis currently have Gaza locked down pretty tightly. So in the West Bank, you have the Palestinian Authority. You have Fatah, I think, is the political arm of that. And so there's some self-governance, some self-policing. In the Gaza, on the other hand, you have Hamas, which is unabashedly a terrorist organization, unabashedly calls for the destruction of Israel. And so this is a much more, not necessarily dangerous, but more threat-heightened environment, perhaps. And it's a different culture, too. Later in here, she's like walking around and explains that it's more religious, more traditional. It's not as forward-looking. She says that, like, if she in the West Bank, girls they'll wear the headscarves, but they also wear like normal clothes under it. Whereas in Gaza, you're going to she sees more girls dressed in like shapeless bags, the abayas and whatnot, along with the headscarves, hiding their eyes and things like that. So it's a more conservative area. And now she's ends up talking to terrorists flat out, right? She has been before this talking to kids that are angry and in pain and are thinking about getting involved in terrorism. She's been talking to the families of people who have lost brothers and sisters and siblings and kids to terrorism or to Israeli activities and so on. But now she's in Gaza and she's talking with grown-ups who send these kids to be exploded. Right? So she's... Okay, let's see. My brother was a suicide operative. The only solution is to fight this way. There's no balance in the power between us. We don't have tanks or Apache helicopters. This is brute force. We have only simple weapons. We have Kalashnikovs. The Israelis always fight us with Apaches and F-16s. The only way to fight them is to make an explosion with our bodies. The world media presents us as terrorists, Farid's brother adds. If someone attacks you, you may not get revenge on one of them. So this is part of the claim for why they choose terrorism, because they don't feel they can fight in any other way. They don't feel that they can attack in any other way. This goes back to the feeling of hope that is missing. They don't seem to believe that by marching and by protesting, by repeated calls out to other countries, that they can do anything. Because frankly, I don't think there's any major country on the entire planet that gives a damn about the Palestinian cause. There are people, there are citizens who care about it, there are individuals, but like one of the issues with the Palestinian bit is like that they're stuck between Israel and Egypt, or Israel and Jordan, or Israel and Iran, right? Between these two countries, and neither one of the countries wants them. So there's nowhere to go. The borders are all controlled. You get out and you get a visa somewhere, but then at the same time, like Egypt doesn't want to all of a sudden accept 1.5 million Palestinians into their country. Of the problems that cause, and because then they'd be acceding to Israeli actions because their own citizens don't like it. At the same time, all these countries would like to become military allies with Israel because they are the premier military power of the Middle East. They're supported by the Americans, and well, you want to be you want to be well connected with the Americans as well, because of the premier military power on the planet. And ideally, there should be a political solution to this trouble, but really, it doesn't seem like there has been. It's been 100 years, and each side is like, well, we want this and we want that. The Palestinians want the right of return, for example. The Israelis are committed to denying that because they don't want that many Palestinians in the territories. It's kind of weird, right? The Palestinians want the ability to defend themselves. The Israelis want to control their borders because they think that terrorists are going to smuggle bombs and bombs in and things like that. And I could go on and on about the specifics, but really it's that you have a group of people stuck in a small area and no real hope for either political solutions or economic advancement in many ways. Right? Like you have countries, or areas at least, like Gaza, which cannot possibly feed themselves, right? Cannot possibly create enough economic activity to boost their own economy. They rely on handouts from across the planet. She says, I nod listening, and though I personally think the idea of revenge just perpetuates a cycle of violence. In the last year, Hamas has sent missiles into the bordering area of Israel, terrorizing local population without killing anyone. They have also been responsible for sending suicide operatives into Israel and into checkpoints controlled by the Israelis. Their suicide missions kill scores. Now many Israelis opt to avoid crowded places, buses, nightclubs, and other places where suicide operatives frequently strike. And that has resulted in Israel tightening the passage from Gaza into Israel and the building of the wall, or what the Israelis call the security fence. Israel has also retaliated via targeted missile assassinations and many incursions into Gaza with tanks and helicopters to disrupt terrorist and military cells, unfortunately also killing innocent civilians, women, and children in these security raids. Right? And each side hits back. Each side fires rockets and kills and destroys. And there's all this collateral damage. Ideally, in war, as far as war can be ideal, you have soldiers fighting soldiers, but this isn't a battlefield where we all form into phalanxes and charge each other for 2 or 3 hours, then separate and go our own way. This is a battle taking place in the middle of towns and cities. Right? There was a 1-year-old girl killed, another girl from school with a bullet in her neck. Right? Sheikh Salid Shahada is a good example, referring to the Israeli targeted assassination of Palestinian leader Sheikh Shahada by a laser-guided 1-ton bomb that was dropped from his home in Gaza City in July 2002. Well, he and other Palestinian leaders were trying to negotiate a unilateral ceasefire that would be acted across both the West Bank and Gaza. The bomb killed 14 other people who were present, 9 children among them. And that illustrates 2 problems, right? Not only are you attacking folk and then killing up their family, killing up the civilians around them. The idea being that it's worth it. The idea being that you're teaching the civilian population that even being around these people is dangerous. And that, of course, just radicalizes them. And the other problem, right, is, look, you keep striking the leaders, which means that the only leaders who survive are the ones who hide, the ones who are violent, the ones who stay in the tunnels, the ones who are sneaky and smart. You're not attacking the ones like who are you trying to fight? This is the conundrum of managing a battle, right? If you're going to negotiate a ceasefire, you need someone to negotiate that ceasefire with. You need someone to be in charge. And if you keep destroying and killing anyone who is in charge, then you end up splintering the group. Or someone does end up in charge, and they're afraid of you. They don't want to talk to you. They're hiding all the time, and you're trying to get them. So you're looking at more surveillance, right? You're looking at cell phones. You're trying to make spies. You're trying to bribe insiders, right? So you foster a feeling of despair and suspicion in the system you're trying to fight. And of course, you feel like you don't want your enemy to be strong, right? Because then they can fight you more. They can hit you harder. I think the big mistake the Israelis probably made is when Hamas refused to have elections. They should have gone in then and forced elections instead of accepting it and ending up with what we have today. And then we think about in the Cold War, the Americans and the Russians had these lines of communication back and forth to ensure that nuclear troubles didn't start, to ensure that minor squabbles over airspace didn't turn into massive wars. On the other hand, you have this. Their operation was done without any warning and happened at prayer time at night. No one expects his house to be destroyed over his head. And then there's the matter of speech. There are famous relations between the Americans and the Soviets where the Soviets visit America and the president, or Reagan or whatnot, or Carter, talks with them on live TV and says, okay, we're going to have a dialogue with these people. We're going to disagree about something. I'm going to stand up and, oh, you believe in communism. I believe in bad communism. In my country, people are allowed to read all the communist books. In your country, they can't read the capitalist books. That seems a bit odd, right? And some of that information must trickle down into the Soviet Union. Some of that information trickles down to the people. Where's the dialogue and the discussion when you kill any leaders on the other side, on the Palestinian side, who arise, and you communicate through showing up in the middle of the night and destroying houses. It's a very effective way of fighting a war. It's a very effective way of destroying their military power. It's a very effective way of increasing their tendency to scatter. But you're also pushing them to fight in certain ways. Instead of saying you can hit us with guns and bullets, you're saying you can hit us with suicide bombers because we'll stop anything else. And you squeeze and you squeeze and squeeze. And just like that book on taxes I read, right? You squeeze too much, the whole thing falls apart. Same with the security, you squeeze too much, and all of a sudden you need to send in your entire military to enforce martial law. But if you don't squeeze at all, then it can end up exploding and growing like a cancer. Like, where's the balance to be found here? And each side sees the other as evil, right? We're talking about Hamas sending suicide bombers into nightclubs and destroying people who may have, some 18-year-old who grew up in Israel that hasn't really voted or paid taxes or truly understands the whole issue because they're 18 or they're 16 or something in a club Sunday, and you blow them up, and what effect does that have? It just terrorizes an entire populace and says to them, we are evil, we are bad, we hate you, unless you were going to... Like, terrorism works to terrify a population, but I don't think terrorism works to change the political actions of a population. You have to... I feel as if you need more massive forces, right? Terrorism didn't take the Americans out of Afghanistan. It was the persistent fighting over years and the weakness of the Palestinian state. It was because eventually someone showed up with enough firepower to push people out of territories. It wasn't because you blew up a tank on a road. That's a first step, right? Terrorizing the population. But again, it's entirely different getting someone to leave and getting someone to leave their own home. You're not going to push the Israelis out by blowing up their kids. You're just going to make them fight harder because they have nowhere to go. It's the same thing. You're not going to get the Palestinians to stop fighting by blowing up and killing their kids. They have nowhere to go. You're trying to squeeze them between a rock and a hard place and then acting surprised when someone fights back. It's ridiculous. You have to give space. I don't know. One of the bits that I find really interesting about the Gaza Strip particularly is, Hamas is in charge and stays in charge. And I'm like, seriously? There's no uprising? The Israelis can't find an enemy political party to support? They can't manage to make any sort of argument at all? And, when you're, it's like the Americans and North Korea, perhaps. It seems so strange to us that there aren't more political points of power within the country, but I guess there aren't. You just have Kim Jong-un in North Korea. And you got to negotiate with that person or nobody. Okay, as I interview terrorists, I'm learning that they, like these Hamas militants, see military actions with high collateral damage as state-sponsored terrorism, no different than their own actions of intentionally targeting civilians. If confronted on this point, they simply argue that they lack the means to carry out surgically precise military strikes, so they must equip suicide bombers to go to their targets, and that they prefer to target military targets, but when they need to have a high impact on their enemy, they would target civilians as well to equalize forces. So that is BS. It's the same on the Israeli side, right? The idea that, okay, we are not able to strike people with targeted ways. We are not able to avoid civilian casualties. We are not able to only hit soldiers, and this, of course, is a lie. You just don't want to spend the resources and effort needed to do that, right? It is the conundrum of any battle, right? You can do almost anything. You can kill almost anyone if you're willing to put enough resources into doing just that and only that. You know, if Ukraine is fighting Russia and they want to kill Putin, then they can probably do it. But while doing it, you may have spent so many resources that your country is falling apart behind you. You know, if you're going to target a specific area, a specific idea, then you can probably do that. But that idea is going to strike back. That person is going to be in charge of all sorts of other bits of power that you have to deal with. So it's the balance of this. I think that if Hamas only targeted soldiers, if Hamas had done something sensible, like, say, held the Rafah border crossing, or just said, you know, any Israeli soldier coming into this area will be regarded as an invasion and will be killed on sight, instead of this bit where you grab civilians and you destroy civilians, right, then the battle probably have changed. The question, of course, on the other side is, if the Israelis were only striking militants, were only putting in jail folk who they could prove in a court of law had been involved in terrorist activities, then would terrorism have happened? It's the question of the chicken and the egg. It's the question of who shot first. It just goes back and back and back. You know, you read about 1948, and the book I read was basically said that so the British were in charge, and there were independence movements on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, and the Brits were like, Brits of the League of Nations was like, okay, well, why don't we split up the country? And neither side wanted that. Both sides thought that they could win and take over all of Palestine and Israel. But only one side could, and only one side did. Right? There were both Palestinian freedom fighters and Israeli freedom fighters blew up and inflicted terrorist actions on the British state apparatus when Israel was a British colony. Was this 1932? No, 1948 was World War II. Okay. Quite independent. I may be getting my times mixed up because there was the independence, and then Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt sort of took over some Palestinian territories and governed them. And then there was 1964, where Israel knocked them out and took over the Palestinian territories, which was, I would argue, a huge mistake. Was it 1924? Oh, I don't know, when Israeli, let me see when Israeli independence happened. Okay, yeah, Declaration of Independence, May 14th, 1948. So I have my times right. And even that in 1948 has a history of struggles and trials going back another 50 years. You know, there were terrorist activities and bombings all over the British territories. It doesn't stop. It doesn't end. You read about the 1964, and part of the problem was that there was a buffer zone between Israel and Lebanon, and Israel kept pushing into it, putting farming land that they agreed they shouldn't farm, and then blaming someone else for why the war started. It's a long history of ridiculous claims and counterclaims. And what you always is some political group, some country, some people deciding to push just a little, push and push and push until something breaks. And you start a war. And each side is going to say, well, we only push in response to the other person pushing us. And go back and forth and back and forth. And it's just like how do you not forgiveness, right? But that idea of just let it go is, we certainly haven't done that in the United States. About we hope we have with the civil rights movement, with the overthrow of slavery, like, okay, we beat it, it's done, let's move on with our lives. And then it turns out that the same problems pop up 50 years later. We never actually fixed all of them. We never actually confronted the issue directly and entirely. I think we did halfway. And this is an interesting little story here, right? In 2006, Hamas won a resounding victory in the Palestinian elections. Prior to the elections, Al-Qaeda leadership had warned Hamas not to take part in the elections and publicly mocked them for believing that any Western power would never allow them to rule if they did win. Immediately following the sweeping victory, the US and EU refused to support the people's electoral choice, saying that Hamas had to recognize Israel and disavow violence. Some groups in Gaza turned to Al-Qaeda and AQ operatives. Al-Qaeda operatives did manage to infiltrate some of the groups inside Gaza. The Army of Islam was one of them. 2 years after an interview in March 2007, Alan Johnston, a BBC reporter, was taken hostage and held captive for 114 days by the Army of Islam. Johnston spent a grueling 3 months of his 4-month captivity in Gaza in a shuttered room, chained, threatened, reported as killed, and convinced he was going to be put to death. So this is one of the bits, look, ideally speaking, 100%, if everything was as good as it could get, if you're going to take a hostage, and you take a hostage and you say, you stay here or we kill you, and you put them in a room, or you put them in a house, and you put some guards around the outside, and they're under house arrest. And, you bring in food, you give them television or something. And, yeah, they're stuck there, but they're a hostage. It's their life you're after, not to torture them. But in reality, what happens? You're held in a locked room. You're stuffed into a box. You're threatened and mocked, and because they have control and they have power over you, and they don't feel like they can do anything actual to the people who threaten them and who they hate. So they attack you because you're there and you represent it. I heard stories of right now, folk who were hostages in Gaza during the last year, right? And how, well, we weren't able to read. We had to stay, we were stuck in a room in a house somewhere. I had to stay quiet in case anyone heard us. The people holding us hostage would mock us. They weren't allowed to talk to us. We were dehumanized because you hold hostages and you can't see them as human. So hold hostages and you can't treat them as human beings with lives and dignity. And then you see the same exact story from kids who or people who have escaped the Israeli prisons, right? I was held in a position for 8 hours at a time. I wasn't given food and water. I was told that I was going to get killed. I was told that my brother and brother had been killed, right? And you're just like these horrible tortures people inflict on one another for no real reason except to feel a sense of power, right? It's ridiculous. All it does is cause more pain and anger, and you have so much pain and anger and angst and suddenly that you have to get it out somehow. And what can you do? You can torture this poor prisoner you've picked up off the street, right? because he's Palestinian or he's Israeli or he's American or whatnot, and because that's who he is, he must be on the other side and he must be evil. And you're like, okay, it's terrible. The Hamas leadership was aghast and reportedly threatened to hunt down the Army of Islam operators down if they did not release Johnston. It was held for, what does it say, 114 days? What the Hamas threatened to arrest some operatives? I mean, these are halfway measures. This is, we're going to sound like we're doing something, but actually we support what these other people are doing. We're going to take advantage of it. And eventually, the Hamas government, who headed Gazan security forces, arrested 2 members of a clan with close ties to the Army of Islam. They revealed information about Johnston's whereabouts, leading to his eventual release in the Hamas leadership's hands. But this is the other problem, right? You may have a government in charge, but how in charge are they really? How powerful are they? How many folk do you need to be involved in a terrorist organization to disrupt the entire apparatus of peace? I mean, obviously, 100%. Okay, one of the issues of democracy, right? One of the major issues of pushing democracy as a political movement is sometimes folk will be elected that you don't like. Folk will be elected that are violent and bad. Folk will be elected who make bad choices. This is the conundrum that the United States of America faced during the Cold War, right? Which we failed at in many ways and many times. We want to support democracy, but we want that democracy to be friendly to us. You look at Vietnam, and this is exactly what happens, right? You go in and you say, okay, we want to push democracy. We want to kick out communism. And it turns out that Ho Chi Minh, the communist Vietnamese leader, is the one most likely to be elected to leadership. And all of a sudden, the Americans go, oh my God, we can't have that. We can have democracy, but it must be democracy that we support. And so they end up supporting this dictatorship, this pseudo presidency in the southern Vietnamese side, instead of just letting events take their run. Right? There's another book I want to read again, which will go into why the pacification of Japan worked and the pacification of Vietnam didn't work. And it's really, I think, about the amount of control you have and how willing you are for those people to change themselves. It's like in Syria, right? You recently had some, I don't remember, it was a group in the northwest of Syria, I think, that overthrew Bashar al-Assad and took over the country. Now they're trying to weld together all the various disparate political powers of Syria into one functioning government. But they got to deal with their own base, and they're got to deal with how do we have the sanctions put on us? Are they being pulled off? Who supports us? Who doesn't? Do we need outside support? Are enemies being supported by outside powers? And so on and so on. And you're stuck between. This is the history of the Middle East, right? They're stuck between great powers. They're stuck between the Soviet Union and the United States, and they're trying to be the third world. They're trying to be friendly to each side. And the United States and the Soviet Union don't want that. They want to overthrow these governments completely and put their own people in charge who are favorable to them, like Iran or Vietnam or all the communist movements. And look, if you're pushing democracy, sometimes you end up with the communists in charge. Sometimes you end up with the socialists in charge. Sometimes you end up with this terrorist organization in charge. And the point is, again, is to attack people for their actions. I don't care that the terrorist organization is avowing terrorism. I care if they actually engage in it. I care if they do it. Because actions speak louder than words. So let the group say whatever they want. But the minute they send a suicide bomber over, right? The minute they fail to work with you, then you see them as the hypocrites they are. Right? And you punish them. And then you hold another election in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years or whatever. And you say to the people, look, if you keep choosing this group to be in charge, then we're going to keep pushing you. Choose a different group. Work with us. You offer a helping hand. You offer a hope. And you help your enemy become stronger so that then you can tear them apart, right? Because they're frail as they link together. You help your enemy become stronger so that they can grow out of their chrysalis and become a butterfly instead of this salivating worm that's hungry for mud and blood. Right? And the story just goes on and on. Again, this is political at this point because she's talking to the terrorists, not the suicide bombers necessarily. In 2005, patience on both sides is running out. Hamas sends suicide bombers into Israel. The Israeli government unilaterally pulls out of Gaza. But when they do exit, what could have been a major move for peace building quickly fails as Israelis readily build new settlements in more favorable territory, continuing to encroach from the West Bank and areas to the east of Jerusalem. Palestinians thus continue to fool their militant movements, while Israelis claim they gave up all their Gaza settlements, and therefore the Palestinians should be more reasonable, right? It's just hypocrisy on both sides. We're willing to work with you, but we'll also send suicide bombers because we have our own radical movements. We're willing to pull out of this area, but when we do, we'll move into another area. Like how do you break this cycle? How do you take the two organizations and crack them? Because we're hearing about Hamas as a terrorist organization, but here, right, the leaders of Hamas visit us even now to give us and the children spiritual support. They check on us frequently, his wife agrees. Other political movements don't care about their martyrs after. They're just killed and forgotten. But these ones don't forget. They bring sweets and toys for the children, visit frequently, and at festivals their names are read. This makes us very proud. Now the children are enrolled in the Hamas school and take social cars to school. For the poor and the martyred children, these services are free. And another conundrum, right? You are at one point the political movement of the country and you're trying to argue for peace, but you're also saying, look at these martyrs, look at these suicide bombers and how great and good they are. We must honor them. And it's the same in any country. The British thought that the Americans were bad and evil for leading their revolution. Today you still have the idea in the South that it was the war of northern aggression, and that you have Ulysses S. Grant, like his march to the sea, or he razed and destroyed hundreds of miles worth of crops and buildings. You still have the old stories popping up, and it's interesting thinking about the past, because in the one sense, we want the past to help us, to be a foundation, to be something we can rely upon. We want the past to have taught us lessons, but we also want the past to not poison us. We want the past hatreds to be such that we can overcome them. We want to look at our past and say this was good and this was bad, and we will be better next time. We want to think that this happened in the past, but we and the other group can now negotiate and move beyond. But it turns out the same people are still involved. Right? How long does it take for the memory of a massacre to disappear? The rape of Nanjing, for example. When will that be a historical oddity? When will that be the King of Quinn or something, right? When will that be the bombing of Tokyo? When will that be just something like slavery that happened? 100 years, 200, 300, 1,000, 2,000? I mean, we still remember the burning of the Library of Alexandria. How do you get past it? How do you remember and validate on, honor and justice and fighting, while also understanding that it's war and terrible, right? I mean, you look at George Washington in the States, but he was also a slaveholder. I mean, good and bad. How do you reconcile these into a true vision of what we should do and be? How do you look at George Washington and say, yeah, I admire he did this, but I don't think that this was good. And today we're going to focus on the admirable parts and be better next time. Like, how do you look at a suicide bomber and say, look, I understand that there's something admirable in that you're willing to give your life for a cause, but also it's something terrible and that you are killing yourself and you are, attacking civilians. How do you move with that? How as Israel do you reconcile we are a people who has suffered much and we make ourselves safe and we're working democracy and we're aiming for peace with the facts of mass incarceration and killing children and pushing these settlements all the time and being hypocritical and the good and the bad? How do you reconcile that? She says here, this is something I'm definitely seeing throughout Palestine. Family members claim that the martyr was psychologically healthy, when it is looking like, in truth, the majority, if not all, Palestinians appear to be deeply traumatized by the violence they have witnessed in their national conflict with Israel. One of the older aunts of the family has joined us while Tastier's cousin was speaking. We are introduced. She joins in the conversation, saying all the children are affected. When a woman sees a body, any piece of a body, Tastier's cousin's speech drifts off, her face contorting in horror. When I saw my first person shot on the neck on TV, I felt horrible, Tastier's wife says, but now she's seen much worse. Sometimes you see a rocket hit a person in front of your eyes and you just collapse. We watch them put the injured with their detached body parts in an ambulance. Elsewhere, people try to run away when there is an attack, but here people group together and try to help one another. You begin to feel numb to it. No, we're humans, not animals. You still feel it. Feel it. Most people think Palestinians are very violent people, but when they see with their own eyes, they understand. You generally see people very sad that their relatives exploded, but here people also decide to be proud. Right? Because this is the way people act. You can be ashamed of something, but also you try to take pride in it. And imagine your child blows themselves up, wanders into the town next door with a handgun and starts shooting settlers and gets shot in return. You're afraid, you're horrified, you're sickened and saddened, but you're also like you don't want to think that your child is evil and bad and horrible and doomed to go to hell. Right? You want to feel some hope that life turned out better for one of them. You tell yourself, well, I know he killed himself, but at least he's not miserable now. Right? You want to say, I wish he hadn't gone. I would have done anything I could to stop him from going and suicide bombing. But I also have to enter into the population and deal with people telling me they're so sorry, or people telling me they're so proud, right? And I want to feel like at least you convince yourself that they at least did something. You convince yourself that, hey, at least they sacrificed themselves for the cause, and this is something to be proud of, some glimmer of good feeling to be found in your child killing themselves, because you're desperate for it. You're desperate for some sort of warmth when you're cold and tortured. And sometimes you end up going to extreme movements. Sometimes you end up feeling that life is so horrible that anything is permitted. They're talking here like, oh, well, sometimes you just see a rocket hit a person in front of your eyes. Sometimes you're just walking along and then a rocket hits somebody and they blow up in your face and there's limbs and blood everywhere. It's the same in Israel, right? Sometimes you're in a nightclub, you walk outside and then all of a sudden, giant explosion, you turn around and there's half an arm hanging on a doorway. I mean, I know what this does to people. And she'll talk about this in the book also, that it's not only, oh, I experienced it myself firsthand, but also I know stories. People tell me about it. I see it on TV, right? These ideas permeate an entire civilization. And how do you get out of it? You have to have a new idea permeate the entire civilization. You have to have some hope that we can remove ourselves from this horrible life, some hope that we can find pride in terrible things and move past the terrible things and be better next time. You know, my son killed himself, but what about my grandson? How do I ensure that they don't kill themselves? You know, how do I focus on that? How do I make it work? Nine months after Naji's death, his mother explained in Palestinian TV, "Before I went on my pilgrimage to Mecca, Naji put his hand in my head and said, 'Mother, pray for me to become a bomber, or it will be your sin, and I won't forgive you until Judgment Day.'" She went on to explain, "During the ceremonies in Mecca and Medina, since it was entrusted to me, I prayed for him, saying, 'Praise Allah, my children asked for martyrdom. It's better than other ways to die. In any way, we will die.' For me, these words are the resigned acceptance of a mother to her militant son's probable fate as a fighter in the battle for independence." And the fact that the Palestinian Authority arranged for her interview along with other mothers and martyrs shows the PA uses its media outlets and authority to glorify suicide operations by honoring the parents of those who have carried out such acts. By doing so, the PA actively contributes to the Palestinian cult of martyrdom by creating a supportive social environment for promoting suicide terrorism. I mean, imagine you're trying to work with the government and they are pushing a message that suicide terrorism is good. Imagine, this is the conundrum. Let's say you are... Let's say you're Hamas and you're working with the Israelis and you manage to come to an agreement. And then the Israelis are like, okay, we're going to put some more, now since we have an agreement with you, we're going to put some more settlements in the West Bank. Or now we have an agreement with you, and so we're going to work together in security. And here's the number, here's the names of people we think are involved in terrorism that we should both stop, right? And you're trying to work with Israel, but then it turns out that they're also actively trying to, kill members of your political party because they think they're involved in terrorism. You got Mossad agents in wandering through your town, planting bombs and doing things like that. You're trying to work with them, and then there's some minor disagreement, and they shut the electricity off to half of Gaza because you didn't do something they wanted, and now you're realizing, oh, so someone else has the power. Imagine you're Israel and you're trying to work with Hamas, and you say, okay, we're gonna have an agreement. We're gonna come to a method to work together. We're gonna come to a vision for peace, and then you can see on TV supported by Hamas. You can see in the words of their leaders that they call for the destruction of your people and the obliteration of everything you've built over the last 70 years of Israeli independence. And you're going, well, I can't trust these people. And each side goes, I can't trust. No, there's no trust. And it's just like you would think. I was talking once with a guy. He was in his late 60s when I met him, but he was telling me that he used to be like he used to be some sort of special ops guy in the Middle East during the Cold War, and he's involved in this story back and forth, and eventually there's a girl involved and another Russian fighter on the other side. And it turns out that, this girl is in trouble, and he helps this girl get home to her family. And the entire time there was a Russian sniper that had him in his sights. And then he shows up and he's like, I didn't kill you because you were helping a Russian woman. And this starts up an acquaintance with someone on the other side. And now that's the ideal, right? In shonen anime, in shonen manga, you fight with your enemy, and then you grow to understand each other through that fighting. You grow to empathize it and know who the other person is, and then you show some morality on each side that we'll work together to defeat the real bad guy, or we'll work together in order to help this person, or I'm not going to take advantage of your weakness, or I'm not going to attack your family. I mean, that's part of the difference between, I want to say, Superman and Spider-Man. To digress. You don't really see a lot of stories about Superman's enemies attacking his parents. You see stories about Lois Lane being in danger, but it's because of her job. It's because she is a reporter, and Superman has to rescue her, right? On the other hand, with Spider-Man, you see stories that as soon as his enemies know that Mary Jane exists, or Gwen Stacy, or Aunt May, then they go after him. That by Peter Parker revealing his identity, his enemies take advantage of that, and all of a sudden, they're that much worse, because they themselves don't have family, right? Because they know that Peter Parker isn't going to go after their family, but they're willing to go after his. Part of the greater complexities really show up in Peter Parker and the Green Goblin. Because there are stories where Green Goblin knows who Peter Parker is. There are stories where Green Goblin has these long relationships with his own son, who was a friend with Harry, who was a friend of Peter Parker, right? And it gets more complicated there. People know things, and what happens eventually? The Green Goblin goes absolutely crazy and does something unforgivable, steps over a line, and Peter has to finally knock him down. But there was this sort of understanding here, and this is the question: can you move from Spider-Man to Superman? Can you move from Green Goblin and Peter Parker to My Hero Academia or something, where the enemy can be redeemed and the good guy can learn about the realities of the world, and you can, through fighting, engage in some sort of conversation. This happens in school too, right? Sometimes you get bullied in school and you fight back. And when you fight back against a bully, there are two options that most likely are going to happen. One option is you fight the bully, they realize that you're a fighter, and you come to a sort of tenseful respect that each of you has with the other. Not really friends, right? But the bully knows that if he does anything, you'll hit him back. But the bully also knows that you aren't going to hit him and you aren't going to bully him. You're going to attack him just because of who he is. So you sort of step away from each other. You have an armistice. And sometimes you're a little more friendly to each other. Sometimes you're a little more antagonistic. But you have this relationship that is stable. Okay? The other thing that can happen is you have no relationship at all. The bully is like, oh my gosh, he's fighting back. I must hit him more and more and more. I must go more. It must be harder and harder and stronger until something breaks and someone dies, or someone's arm is torn in half, or someone brings a gun to school, right? And this fighting, instead of equilibralizing, as each person realizes their own limits and each person feels that they have some sort of power in this relationship, you have somebody unwilling to accept that they are not going to be the power. They're not going to win entirely. So they fight and fight and fight until something explodes. And that's the real question. Today, when we talk about terrorism in Palestine and Israel, we are most clearly, I would say, on the route of there's no equilibrium. You're just fighting until each one side breaks. And each side, the Israeli government, right-wing government, certainly, is just hoping that magically one day the Palestinians will disappear. Or voluntarily leave and be someone else's problem. That seems to be the actual plan, is that, hey, we'll just keep pushing and eventually they'll break first. It might take us 150 years and, we'll suffer pain and death, but we'll be in political power too. So that's useful. And Hamas is the same idea, right? Exactly the same. We're just going to keep pushing and pushing, and one day, eventually, the Israelis will crack. They'll make a mistake, and we'll be able to destroy them entirely. That's like one of the big issues I see. That there's no, and theoretically, the Israeli left is willing to work for peace, but they can't seem to stay in power long enough to actually push it. And theoretically, the Palestinian powers are willing to push for peace, but realistically, they don't have enough power, or they're corrupt, or they're unwilling to negotiate. And so, I don't know. It just feels like you need some massive political change within both Israel and Palestine for some truce to happen. Because what's going to, right now there's this talk about a truce with Gaza and Hamas, and what's most likely to happen, right? They come to an agreement, with the status quo, and Hamas is still in charge, or at least some terrorist organization is still in charge because there's no other power. And there'll be an agreement to put somebody in power. There'll be an agreement for an interim government. There'll be an agreement for foreign sponsors. But I don't know how to expect that you actually get out of it, because it's an agreement towards peace, but it's not an agreement towards fixing the actual problem. It's not an agreement toward independence in any way. Or at least that's the thing you feel today. And like to talk about a particular problem. We approach the buffer zone now. In the distance, we see a barrier fence with barbed wire across it, dotted every 40 feet or so by raised Israeli guard posts, similar to what one would see in a prison perimeter. The Israelis expanded a buffer zone at the border that is currently up to 300 meters wide. Approximately a year ago, in May 2004, the Israelis made a major incursion into Rafah, and after a battle with the local Palestinians, bulldozed 298 buildings in an effort to stop the underground smuggling of Qassam rockets via tunnels from Egypt to Gaza. Bulldozing occurred during regular nighttime raids. Like, what is that? Regular nighttime raids that just happens with little or no warning, displacing more than 16,000 people. And can you go back and forth between Egypt via the Rafah checkpoint? Asked Mo. No, not freely, he answered. The Israelis control it. It's closed most of the time. So you see part of the problem here. There's no opening. If you're stuck, if you're a Palestinian, right, there's no actual independence because your border is controlled by Israel, by another state. There's no, I mean, one of the things that I think is very interesting is you would think that whoever on earth is in charge of Gaza, whatever Palestinian is in charge of Gaza, would be Egypt's best friend. would be yes, sir, no, sir, whatever you want, sir. How high do I jump, sir? For Egypt, because that is the only other border they have, and it's the only possibly friendly border they could have. And yet you hear about these tensions between Egypt and whatever powers in Gaza, right? I mean, the Israelis control the checkpoint between Gaza and Egypt. That means the Israelis control Gaza. If you can't get out, if you're stuck inside, if someone else controls your water and your electricity and whether you get food or not, that's a giant prison. And how do we react in prison? How do we react when our freedom is destroyed? How do we react when a guard can come into our cell at any time? We have no privacy. We have no autonomy. We are just a worm suffering between the boots of someone else. And we're hoping that they don't step on us. We're asking and praying them not to step on us. So someone we know, and then a worm ends up getting a knife someday or growing teeth. Okay, so this is interesting. We get into a more specific issue. She'll say, I immediately say, Mo, Ken told me your father's really violent and beats you all the time. Mo's eyebrows rise in panic and he pushes his chair back. I told Ken not to tell you, who exclaims, eyes wide with fear. Yes, I know. But he told me because he cares about you and he knew it. I wouldn't be able to keep silent, and sounds like your father is dangerous and I could seriously injure you. You don't deserve that. I'd like to help if I can. Mo has turned his gaze downward and his head is bowed. It's clear that he's really ashamed and afraid to say no more. I'd like to help you if I can. This is child abuse and now it's assault. Mo replies, you don't know Islam. You don't understand that in Gaza we honor our parents. I know it's really important, but you don't have to suffer abuse to honor him. There's nothing you can do, Mo says, lifting his head, but thank you for caring. Right? So she's talking to this kid named Mo. And his father beats him. He feels ashamed of this because this says, like, to yourself, right? When your dad is beating you up, right? It says, I'm not strong. This says, I am bad because the father figure is beating me, so I must have done something bad. And you're trying to figure out what that is, and you try to be better and better and better, but it just keeps happening. And eventually you realize, okay, so eventually you get it out and you realize, it's their fault. It's their problem. It's them not honoring the son like they should be. It's them not doing their fatherly job. But it takes a while to come into that realization. It takes a while to actually understand what's going on. And if you aren't able to get out of it, if you feel ashamed all the time, then that affects your daily life. That affects how you live and exist. So Mo will show up again in a little bit. But this microcosm of events is, what makes me feel this, because I know what that's like. And I can take that idea and expand it to the entire population of Gaza here. Say, okay, I understand a little bit. I'm not in there. I'm not suffering the same way. I don't have the same history, right? I can just say I catch a glimpse of some part of the feeling that's going on here. And I know what helps me get out of it, and my emotions and my growth, so that I can stand here and babble. But again, what does it take? What does it take? 15 years to actually stand up? 15 years to get over or at least begin to get over your childhood traumas and talk about them. And I have time and space, and I can travel, and I have especially I think I have books and stories. I can read whatever I want, as long as it's printed in English or translated into English. And then I can find these heroes. I'm not tied to a religion or a culture. I'm not stuck inside a box. I am outside any box except that which I create in my own head. But when you are younger, right, when you are stuck in that box, when you only have a limited number of stories to call upon, and none of them seem to match you or meet you, none of them seem to give you the answer, because the people acting aren't acting the way that they do in the stories, and you don't have the options that they have in the stories. Like, you aren't a hero, you aren't strong, you aren't brave or smart. Instead, you're just a worm. And you want to grow into a dragon or a butterfly one day, right? You want to go into a chrysalis and dissolve yourself, come out something completely new and different, but you can't really. The same bones remain buried deep within you. The same history and blood flows through your veins as it did when you were 12 or 10 or 14 or 25. So you have to take what you have and transform it instead of just discarding it entirely. There are people who discard it entirely, though. Right? There are folk who say, I am going to undergo surgeries and change my name and not talk to my family anymore. And so I don't want to be what I was at all in any way. And that's a huge jump, which I don't feel is always the most comfortable or healthy jump to make. It's more like something you do because you have no other option, because you're desperate and you're cursed. And I'd want to say that there's somewhere you can get past it, but it's difficult, and it's individual issues to get past. And when you expand those individual issues to entire civilizations, to entire terrorist movements and governments and armies, it becomes more complicated. Right? Disappointed, we depart, and later when I return home, I read news reports of our action. According to the IDF, Reem successfully thwarted the security procedures at the checkpoint by pretending to be crippled. When taken to the private area for her checks, she detonated her 2-kilogram bomb. The explosion killed 4 Israelis, 2 soldiers, a policeman, and a civilian security worker, and wounded an additional 7 Israelis and 4 Palestinians. Reem and her Hamas senders took full advantage of this instance of Israeli decency to kill as many Israelis as possible. It has to do with it's a cultural issue, it's a historical issue, it's a professionalism issue. I remember there was some bit on TikTok I watched a couple months ago. I remember it because it was a guy who used to be part of the CIA saying that the CIA does not have undercover operatives in the Peace Corps. The CIA refuses to have undercover operatives in the Peace Corps. If you work for the Peace Corps, you can't be an undercover operative for the CIA. If you work in the CIA, you cannot. If you work for the CIA as an undercover operative, you cannot join the Peace Corps, because they want to separate these two identities. They want there to be no glimmer of a belief that the Peace Corps, the activities the Peace Corps undertakes, are part of the CIA's clandestine operations. Because this ensures that the Peace Corps is not harassed, is not attacked in this way. This ensures that the enemies of the CIA are not the enemies of the Peace Corps. It says we will act in a certain, we have morals, right? We have a certain level of decency, and we'll act with that. So something like this. Again, I think it is entirely understandable to destroy people who come into your land, to attack folk who set up checkpoints, in land that you believe belongs to you. It is entirely different, however, to take advantage of something like the way people act towards cripples, right? because now by detonating a wheelchair, you are attacking the very idea that we should be accessible to those who are disadvantaged physically. You end up hurting yourself. Like this story here, right? The explosion killed 4 Israelis and wounded 7 Israelis and 4 Palestinians. You're blowing up your own people. It's like taking your folk and sending them into a nightclub in Israel. By doing this, you allow your enemy to vilify you. You assist your enemy in making you seem evil. You actually strengthen your enemy by being so terrible. That's the problem of terrorism, right? It is not war. It's something much, much worse. It's something where the agreements and the feelings we have about how we interact with each other are completely different. And this happens because some group feels it cannot fight legitimately, because it cannot fight bombs and tanks and airplanes and mass movements of soldiers. But, I really wonder how true that is. It's one of the conundrums of, let's say, the US interfering in the Middle East. There's a difference between the Iraq invasion and the Afghanistani invasions, right? In Afghanistan, we supported the Northern Alliance and gave support to an already existing political and military movement inside the country. That is, the country was already split in half, and we simply picked a side to support. So then when people say, oh, the Americans are doing this, it's the Americans invading Afghanistan. No. It's the Americans interfering in an Afghanistani civil war. And this is a perfectly legitimate action. The country itself is already split in half, and we're just supporting one side. We know who we want to win, and as an outsider, like, who is more legitimate? Democracy can decide. So, like, Vietnam was a mistake. In Vietnam, we were wrong. If we were going to go in and support democracy in Vietnam, then you have the democratic movement, and ding, whoever wins, and you work with what you get. If instead you end up supporting a dictator, if instead you end up with, like, the dictatorship in South Korea or the dictatorship in Taiwan, then it is much less legitimate. Because you're helping a government that does not have the support of its citizens. Or at least can't claim to have the support of its citizens. Ream's attack struck further terror into the Israeli military and civilian population. The Erez checkpoint was closed for several days, prohibiting 4,000 Palestinian laborers from reaching their jobs in the Israeli industrial zone. One explosion, 4,000 people can't go to work for a week or two. And what does that, or several days, what does that do to their families and their beliefs and their feelings? But what if you say business is normal? It was a suicide bombing, and tomorrow it's gone. That's just what happens. And there's another one. You want there to be some reaction to this. You want there to be some belief that this is not normal, this is not right, this has terrible effect. The question really comes to be like, do you react differently to a terrorist activity than to a military activity? Is there a distinction between the military and the civilians? Terrorism doesn't have any. That's one of its defining points, I would say. I say that as an American whose government engages in these activities, right? You'll launch a missile at a wedding because one person there is a terrorist that you know of. Now, by 2007, 88 Palestinian women had attempted to become suicide bombers. Okay. So Mo shows up again, and it turns out that he's gay, and this is apparently a literal death sentence in Gaza, which again is absolutely idiotic. You're just starting to attack your own people. I mean, and he writes to her. Eventually, he gets out. Eventually, he manages to go to Spain. It takes him several years, and he has an opportunity to go, to 2 or 3 or 4 different countries, but it always falls through at the last moment. Some scholarship to study there falls through at the last moment. And I'm just gonna read like what Mo says here without a whole bunch of comment, because it's really about like the feelings that one individual person has. And you think, well, why would this person choose to act? Why would this person choose to be a terrorist? Why would this person, look at a suicide bomber and say, maybe that could be me? Well, this is why. What's happening, I ask? Sonic bombs, nasty smell of bombs, F-16 Merkava tanks, Apache and Cobra helicopters, rockets, no electricity, no water, crowded sheltering, civilians and children in the well of destruction. 18 days passed until his next email. The IDF were in my village for 4 days, killed 2 civilians and arrested more than 70 people. I wish to stop all of that violence around the world. Life is so nice and important, and it's not anyone's decision to finish it. Only God should do that, and I'm sure he will be fair. His next is less hopeful. I feel dead. Again and again, I can't scream. I can't shout or cry. The amount of anger inside me is just inside. I can't release it. I thought writing will help, but it didn't. Am I just clicking and pressing small, dumb things that transfer what I feel to you in one way or another? Electric signals are not the real feelings. My heart is so tired. I don't know what to do, what to say. I want someone to hug me, someone to feel sorry for me, someone to make me happy. I have no one to do that here. I'm living in the worst place in the world, the worst parents ever, and I feel angry, so angry. I want to leave home, but I can't, he continues on September 8th. I tried to find a job, and I failed. Now my parents are threatening to kick me out. I feel like I have no feelings, like my heart really wants to scream, shout, fight, and cry, but somehow my body keeps stopping it, but not on purpose. I am not normal at all. I feel so ashamed of myself telling you that, but you are the only one that I trust. I'm totally alone in this world. The other thing is that I left Islamic University. I couldn't complete there. I was trying to find a job, and many times I didn't attend lectures and I have bad grades. The problem is that they will send my grades to my dad. I don't want him to know. I'm living in hell nowadays, afraid, so afraid. My father, he never cared about my life, and now I can even be killed. Please help me, and I will totally understand if you don't want to help me, but it's my life between your hands. Please don't tell anyone, please. It's a matter of time. He will know I must leave home. Yesterday he beat my sister so badly with a leather belt. I told my sister and mom that I would try and stop Dad. They think that he can't be stopped, and the worst is that they believe it's like a diabetic. His sickness can't be stopped, but you can live with it. My mom wants to live that way, my sister too. If I tried to stop him, no one will support me. In Islam, you must obey your parents, but they mistake the concept. They can't change it. I went to the Egyptian embassy asking them for a visa to Egypt. They refused it, and as I told you before, it's impossible. Now I have no hope, not anymore. And I swear that some militants shot a guy in the leg in front of my eyes. I was in a car behind him. And then they came to my taxi and asked about my ID. I couldn't even talk or breathe. 2 women and a little girl were in my car. I need to talk because I can't handle it. Please call me. It's my birthday gift, and I will never forget it, so happy birthday to me. In my world, I don't have my own world. I don't have a world in my own so-called world. In my world, joy is sad. He killed the happiness that I never had. In my world, there is pain. There are eyes that are always red. In my heart, there's a knife made of evil, made of sorrow. In my life, life is lifeless. In my dream, visions are helpless. In my dreams, in my mind, there is a wish not to be famous, not to be rich, only to be loved. While I am writing this, I have a very big, dark blue, painful circle around my eyes. My so-called father smashed me like a punishing bag and spit in my face because I was watching a TV show called So You Think You Can Dance. But it is okay because I never experienced a week without being beaten like a punishing bag. Signature, a semi-human being wanting to be a full human. And I want to ask you about, now he's in Spain. I want to ask you about something. After I came here, after a month and a half, I started to experience some strange, scary, horrific nightmares about the war in Gaza. Dead bodies, and even much worse than the war itself. It's really bad. Now I almost see one nightmare every week, and I wake up scared, shaking, and sweating, and I even feel like I was really running for 10 kilometers. I don't know if I'm going to see more of these nightmares. Also, I don't know if it's going to go another direction, if there are stages or things like that. Hoping to hear from you soon. I am still in Spain, but I am not okay. Looking for a job and feeling guilty to be here while my family is there. I'm literally fighting to survive and having strange thoughts. I have many discussions between me and myself. I'm trying to control things, but I can't. I'm thinking a lot of, well, just jump and end things. I'm a loser. I am useless and helpless and a sinner, maybe. Better not to talk about that. Hey, Anne, just wanted to tell you that my father died in an accident. I have a mixture of feelings. Tell me, what should I feel? Normally in my case, what line of feelings I should be experiencing, because I just don't know. This is one person. This is one random kid. And it just reads like a cavalcade of horrors. Being attacked, being beaten, being held up, can't escape. People die in front of me. Even if I do get out, I still can't help my people or my family, and I'm suffering these nightmares. I'm gone, but I'm still feeling and seeing all those horrors. It never seems to go away. Someone died, or I heard about this terrible thing happening, and I don't even know what to feel. Should I be happy? Should I be sad? I'm just numb inside. This is one person, one guy. Now imagine that a million of them. Imagine what they grew up to be. Imagine that you have no therapy. Imagine that you're gay or trans or lesbian or pan or whatever the case may be. Imagine that you identify as black or white or gray or furry or something. And there's nowhere to go. Imagine that what you are is despised. Imagine that even if you want peace, there are other people who will hate you for wanting that peace. And if you want war, there are people who will hate you for wanting that war. And you're just sitting there as a confused, depressed individual. Sometimes you explode. Sometimes you pass away. Sometimes you get out. Sometimes you decide to do something different. Okay, so she is then, very soon after this, picked up, essentially, by the Israelis as interviewing terrorists, and they don't like that. So she's put on lists. She's threatened, and so on. So she eventually stops going and interviewing terrorists. But before, so the next bit, she talks with people in Europe. But before that, I want to go back to chapter 22. Because after that bit of horror, right, where you're trying to understand not just the terrorism, but like the kids who exist in this environment where terrorism happens. So there's a very interesting interview here. When Erin Ahmed, the person in the purple abaya that reprimanded me in the courtyard, tells us her name, Yoram immediately recognizes her as a young woman who on May 2nd, 2002, wore a bomb-filled backpack strapped to her body for 6 hours while walking around Israel before deciding not to detonate. Erin called her senders to tell them she wanted to be taken back home. And this is a very interesting phenomenon, to come to the cusp of explosion and decide to live. Okay, he says, I had a boyfriend who was killed by the IDF. This is the thing that pushed her over the edge. She nods, begins again. I thought that my home will come in danger, that the Israelis can come and fight us. There's nothing to do as a girl, I haven't got any weapon, and I have to save my world. This was the only way to play my role, my responsibility to my nation, my family. At the last moment, I changed my mind. We deserve a lot more than anyone else. I have to fight for my life. I have to live my life as any girl. I wanted to work in a bank. It's my right in my country to go to the disco, the park, a garden, in a car, to go to the sea whenever I want. All of these desires are forbidden because we are under occupation. All things are forbidden. You cannot go anywhere. You took the bomb after your boyfriend was killed. Yes. 2 months later. What was his name? Yoram presses in his interrogator style, but Erin answers, I can't say his name. She has tears again in her eyes and looks at me as if pleading with her eyes to change the subject. Not yet, he's still a part of myself. His death was really traumatic for you, I say, trying to deflect the pressure from Yoram's question. She says, my mind was stopped, my thoughts, my life was stopped. Everything was black. I cannot sleep. Once he came to me in a dream or a hallucination. I feel him all the time. And then, who asked you to take this mission? I wasn't asked, Erin corrects him. I went to the group and said, I want to make a suicide bomb. I didn't have to explain anything, only this one sentence. They gave it to me in 3 or 4 days. Do you think becoming a hero in your society gives you any motivation? I don't care about the posters, she says. They will fall off the walls. I wanted my family to remember. How did you feel? And what did you do between the time you asked for the mission and the time you went? I was not normal. I felt disconnected from them, and they felt it. My family asked what's going on. I said I was sick. I wrote a letter for them saying, forgive me, and I'm really sorry, this is my life, and I want to end it in my own way. When I came back, I destroyed it. Can you describe what you felt when you put this bomb on? I wore it for 6 hours. I went out of the house in Yehuda. I was not in consciousness. When I meet bad things, I move away. I collect the bad things, and I work them out inside myself. What brought you back to feeling again? I was very nervous, Erin answers. I felt my mind stopped. For these 6 hours, I can't think. Just at the last moment, I looked at the people, looked at babies. I saw babies. I thought, if he dies, what shall I tell God? What should I tell him? If he wants to God wants to cut my life and take my soul, he can, but I don't have the right. I can change my mind anytime. It's my mind, it's my life. No one can tell me it's my decision. Right? So we hear a classic story. She's living in Palestine. She wants all these freedoms. She wants to go to the club. She wants to travel. She wants to go to the sea. She can't because she's living in a prison. Then one day she forms a emotional connection with a boyfriend who is killed. And she disassociates. She feels horrible. And she decides to strike back in some way. She says, I must do something. I can't live like this. I cannot exist like this. So she goes and she finds a group and says, give me a bomb. I will go and kill myself. Notably, she isn't already a part of a terrorist organization. She's not equipped and groomed by a terrorist organization to be a terrorist. She's just someone who, because she lives in the area, knows how to get in contact with these terrorist groups, knows that they'll give her a bomb, and so she puts it on. And as she walks around, she doesn't really feel anything. She asks her family to forgive her for killing herself, but it's her life. It's her right to do what she wants with her life. And she can't go to the sea. She can't go to the disco. She can't even love a boy. But what she can do is this. She can be remembered. She can take part in her society as a person, as a fighter. So she puts the bomb on. She wanders into Israel. She walks around. And she says, when I meet bad things, I move away. I collect the bad things and I work them out inside myself. So she is on the cusp of suicide. She has the button in her hand. At any moment, she could explode. Instead, she walks around for 6 hours, thinking and thinking and thinking. And then she sees a baby. She sees the people, and she emphasizes. She says, I don't want to kill these folk. I don't want to be that person. So she goes back. She works it out. She works out these terrible things inside herself and decides to live. So, what do you want to be now that you have the rest of your life back? I ask. I don't know, Erin muses. I have to be unique. She ponders a bit and then asks herself how to get there. I don't like my life. I don't have any rights. I can make for myself a bomb just to tell you and all the world that there is a nation that wants to live his life the same as any other nation. So for you, blowing yourself up, would it be an act of expression? Yes, Erin nods eagerly, happy to be understood. It's the most important. But now you are against it, I ask. Erin nods. If I hurt from something, it's not the answer. Of course not. I don't want anyone to repeat this experience. We are here now to change, to dream what we want when we get out. There is a message here for me. And really, it feels like that's at least part of the answer. I repeat myself again. It's the hope. It's the empathy. It's the realization that I want to express myself as an individual. I want freedoms. And I want to love and exist as a person in society. But how do I do that? Right? How do you stop someone from killing themselves? You give them hope of a better life. How do you stop the suicide bombing? You give people hope that you can express yourself, you can achieve political goals without terrorist activities. After her grief subsided, Erin no longer believes in suicide missions and confirmed to both Yoram and I that she longs for peace. After her grief subsided, after she comes back to herself. And, when we look at Israel and Palestine today, the feeling you really get is that they both, I don't know, Israel seems to have forgotten its own modern identity and gone back to 2,000 years ago. Palestine seems to have attempted to discover its own modern identity and gone back to before 2,000 years ago, before there was a tribe, and you just had the families and groups and gangs. Each village against each other village. A week before the advent of an organized force. Helpless beneath the iron hoof. Israel, meanwhile, is pushing war and only willing to accept absolute abject surrender, but also afraid of losing its identity as a tribal culture and accepting that democracy means coming to terms with all the complicated parts of your population. There's all sorts of people who long for peace, but there are all sorts of people also who long for war. And how do we mediate between these two groups? Both of them wish for a change. And I know I'm just some idiot in the States who is reading a book, but the feeling I get about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the feeling I get about why terrorists do things is that there is no ill hope for change. There's no dialogue. That you have folk who are unable to achieve their own ends. And now, instead of it being 1,000 years ago, when you could set up in a castle somewhere, or run into a forest and become Robin Hood, or take a knife, or poison somebody, now you have access to bombs and missiles. Now, the power that a small organization has to affect the world around it has expanded to such a huge degree. She mentions here, there are, like 200 Palestinian suicide bombers in 3 years. And 200 people is not that much, but it sure has a gigantic effect. We want to think that millions working together can move in the same way, all at once, like a mighty wave, achieving their ends and their goals and happiness. But really, we are a pond. We are a billion separate individual drops, not knowing where we're going or what we're doing. Right? Terrorists in any area are going to be a huge minority of the population. And how do you stop them? You have to convince the majority of the population, the vast majority of the population, that terrorism is not the answer. You have to show that change can be achieved through other means. You have to say that my enemy has power and I will acknowledge that power. I will acknowledge those rights. And we will begin from there, instead of beginning already with despair.